Hey, welcome to the show, Leading and Growing Your Real Estate Business. This is Coach James Short, aka Shorty, and this is a show for those within the real estate industry wanting to lead and grow their real estate business. It's a series of interviews that we conduct for those within the industry. So we're finding out what those leaders are within the industry, what makes them tick, what's their story, what are their strategies, and how to become the leaders and the growers within the industry. But also, it's an interview series with those outside of the industry. I'm always a big believer of looking at a whole different part of the pie rather than just focusing on one part of the pie. Because what it does, it allows you to have a different perspective, allows you to get snippets or golden nuggets from those outside of the industry that can look into the industry and go, there's a different perspective. And so I encourage you to reach out to the guests. I encourage you to lean into these series to find out how can these pieces of information, experiences, stories help you lead and grow your real estate business. Hi, and welcome back to another edition. I'm so excited. I'm so excited because I've been wanting this guest on for a long time, and we've finally found a time that is suited. And oh my goodness, ladies and gentlemen, you're in for a ride. You're in for a treat. There's going to be value bombs dropping left, right, and center. He's worked with a bunch of clients in the past, and he continues to move mountains. He is a mover and a shaker. Nathan Williams has won coach clients to win and judge pitch competitions and presents for industry groups, CEO networks, and associations such as REI New South Wales on pitching, sales, and referrals. Australia's leading pitch coach and founder of a sales consulting company called Customer Return, Nathan has helped over 150 businesses, including Westpac, National Australia Bank, and American Express to get more clients. More recently, Nathan's Perfect Pitch program has been helping leading real estate agents and buyers agents to clearly communicate their value versus competitors so they can get more quality listings and clients. Check out his website called Customer Return. It's an honor and a privilege to have the man of the moment. Thank you for joining us. Nathan, mate, so good to have you on the show.
Yeah, thanks, James. Appreciate your time. Thanks for having me.
Mate, where do we go? Where do we go? Let's go back to the humble beginnings of how did you get into this amazing service and program that you have around pitching and helping clients win more customers?
Yeah, thank you. Well, probably two ways to answer that. The first one is, and I can laugh about it now, but it wasn't funny at the time. I was actually a franchisee in a business where I happened to be the best performing franchisee in the network. So I was quite enjoying it, but it was a smallish network. They weren't generating the sales I thought they should have. And long story short, James, 2 weeks after I got back from a honeymoon, the franchise folded.
Oh,
So the joke with my new wife at the time was obviously, the better or worse thing that we spoke about a couple of weeks ago. Is that still okay? Hopefully that's still good. So off the back of that, I did dally with the idea of getting a job, and I thought, no, I can't do that. So I started my own business, Customer Return, back in early 2010. So that was sort of the first way of answering the question, I suppose. But the second one is since now mid 2013, after I went in a pitch competition where we had to pitch to 300 people. There's a couple of judges there, and there's 55 people in this competition, so it was pretty nerve-wracking.
wow.
Um, yeah, so I went in this pitch competition, and I was pretty, let's be frank, shit scared leading up to it because it was a big, high-pressure public speaking situation. I had speech therapy when I was a kid, so it wasn't something that necessarily came naturally. But something got under my skin about that where I just prepared within an inch of my life. And I managed to win the comp, which in the short term was a great high. But what I soon realized was that, if you get the message right, then it gets you a long way to getting the client. A lot of the other stuff in selling is just around process and steps. But, the pitch is the thing that either gets you your foot in the door or not. So that was mid 2013. And since then, I've specifically focused a lot on pitching because I see the value of that in helping simplify the sales process.
Hey guys, just a little side note here. How's it going? Are you on track this year? I know that sometimes this part of the year we can feel like we're in a bit of a grind, a bit of in the trenches. Are you on track from the original plans that you set out for the rest of this year? What I've realized is that between with this time of year, we get so distracted and we've got trying to chase so many shiny balls and go down so many rabbit holes. And that's why I created a program called the 90. It's a framework that actually allows you to achieve more in 90 days than ever before. Some of the feedback that we've got from some of the people that have used the process, the 90, is that they've achieved more in 90 days than the whole previous year. So if you'd like to have the tools, have the techniques, have the framework on the 90, so you and your team can achieve more in 90 days than ever before. What it does, it impacts you of how to get clear, what you need to do, and who you need to be to show up in order to achieve the things you want to achieve over the next 90 days. Simply head over to jamesshort.com.au, click on join the waitlist, fill in your details, and one of the team members will be in touch and take you through the 90 framework. On with the show. So true. I mean, we're pitching every day. You know, we talked about,
Mm.
kids before we got on the show. Kids are pitching us, and we're pitching kids to put their clean their rooms and so forth. But more importantly, in the real estate world, like real estate agents are pitching every day for their business. It's for their livelihood. And I think, if you look at the whole pitching concept, where do you think a lot of people, real estate or not real estate in business in general, where do you think people get it wrong in relations to pitching? What are some of the things out there where people are just missing the mark?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I'll give you three if that's all right. And
Mm,
the first one is a lack of clarity, and by that I mean when people are experts in what they do, they're close to what they do, so they're the expert, so they understand at this level, at a level 10 out of 10, forgetting that the prospect often understands at a level that might be more like a 2 out of 10. And so there's this gap between their level of understanding, the prospect's level of understanding. So they have this assumed knowledge, but they don't translate their expertise into meaningful pitch points for the prospect. Like they don't
yeah.
always articulate it in ways that resonate with either the problem that prospect's trying to solve or the outcome they're trying to get. And so often there's a lack of clarity because we're making it too complex for the prospect. We think that if we use long words or we make it longer form content, we're going to sound smart. But the old saying is when you're negotiating, smart is dumb and dumb is smart. In other words, simplify it down. Let's not make sure we're talking over the top of people's heads. So number one, lack of clarity. Number two, lack of consistency. Prospects often need to hear the same things up to 7 times before they buy. That number can vary depending on what the purchase is. Whereas often we say, "Oh, I'm getting bored of that message," and we change it. But again, the old saying is, when you get bored of it, they're only just starting to get it. So a lack of consistency or repetition is number two. And then number three, not talking about the problems that we solve. In other words, talking too much about the solution, the benefits, maybe the outcome as well, but not the specific problems we're solving for that prospective client. And people are up to 3 times more likely to buy to avoid a problem and gain a benefit. So if we're not talking about those problems that we solve, then we're missing a trick.
It's so true, right? Particularly that first one. I think, being on the end of we just recently purchased an investment property, and understanding that from that buyer side, and we've done a couple of transactions over the years, but really understanding that process of getting the agent to walk us through, I'm a big observer, right? And saying how people do things over and over again, what's their language, what's their process. But I think so often agents get so stuck in their ways and they think everyone else knows the transaction process, everyone else knows the emotional roller coaster that both the vendors and the buyers go through. And I think you hit the nail on the head in relations to just try and simplify it as much as possible, because otherwise you confuse people. And I think those 3 points are gold. Awesome.
Yeah, it is hard when you're close to it and you're doing it every day. So it's always most talking to clients about, before the prospect walks in the door, just get centered for 2 or 3 minutes and think about, what's their world like and what's their knowledge or lack of your expertise, and just be ready to, not dumb it down, but I'll say smarten it down. Really simplify it and make it easy for that person.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. And so, you've worked with some great businesses and business owners. Those who really nail it and get it right. What's some of the things when they do get it right? What
Mm.
happens and why do they get it right?
Yeah. Well, number one, they understand what at least the bulk of prospects want, and they start there often because everyone has that "what's in it for me" question in their mind. And so rather than talking about, as the service provider, talking about your solution, your program, benefits, outcomes, all that, there can be a lot of assumptions if we just get into that sort of content without first of all checking in on what do they actually want. And you mentioned kids before, James, and look, I've got a 10 and a 13-year-old daughter, and they're killer salespeople, right? They're always pitching us for X, Y, and Z, you name it.
Yep.
But one thing kids do really well, before money and ego and status gets involved, when they get older and maybe when they're not so fearless, is they will ask the same question a second, third, fourth time if they have to. They make sure they either get the answer that they want or it's really clear. So the point there is if we ask someone, what are you most looking for out of a new house, for example, we might get a surface level answer initially, but obviously we've got to keep digging to find out what's really behind that, why they're looking for a bigger house, for example. And it might just be that they need a fourth bedroom. It might be that, well, actually, we haven't had people over at our place for a while because, to be frank, we're a little bit ashamed, but it's not great for entertaining or whatever. So, what do they really want? What's the emotional driver behind the potential purchase? And people don't often volunteer that straight off the bat. So sometimes we've got to dig a little bit. And then the second point I mentioned really briefly, after clearly understanding what they want, as I mentioned earlier, like what are the problems they're facing? Like what are they trying to avoid or move away from? And that's just not what I'll call an external problem, like something visual or tangible that maybe they're trying to avoid or solve. But also, the feeling associated with that. Obviously a lot of life is all about feelings, how are they feeling about it? Why are they feeling that way about it? And what do they want to avoid that moving forward?
Mhm. Yeah, so true. And I think that's so important because we can get so stuck in our own ways but it's those questions, those what else types of questions when you go deeper and you're unpacking. Next minute, people give their whole life history and what's really holding them back. I think it's so important to ask those deeper questions to find out what's their concerns and what do they really want. Um,
Mm, mm,
if someone's listening to this and they go, Nathan, I get it, but where do I start? What would
mm,
be, I guess, some starting points for someone who's maybe not getting the conversions, not really uh, fumbling through their pitch. They're
mm,
changing their pitch every second day. What
mm.
what would be, I guess, a couple of different strategies that you could recommend for that someone who's listening and go, something needs
Mm.
to be done differently here.
Yeah, certainly. Well, if we start at the top and think about the answer to that, so what do you do question. So if we start there as being the first interaction that we might have with a prospective client, in a social setting, and someone says, so what do you do? Now, what do most people do here? They either do two things, I think. They either give what I'll call the category answer, and for example, say real estate agent or buyer's agent, and depending on the person's interest or knowledge about, those professions, it could either kill the conversation or the other person then shares this long-winded story about their experience with an agent, good, bad, indifferent. So they give maybe the category answer, or because they're not clear on how to best answer it, they might give the 3-minute resume or backstory, and no one wants to hear that either. And so a good place to start in answering the "so what do you do" question is to come up with, we talk with clients about this all the time, a simple 4-step, 20-second response to that question. Now that can start off by saying, the question is, so what do you do? And the response can be, well, how, and then you talk about the problem that person might experience when they're looking for a house, for example, or when they're trying to purchase a house, and get some good advice around property. So you start with the problem that you solve, as opposed to the benefit or the outcome, as we said earlier. After you've done that, well, how, when you insert the problem that you solve there, you could then talk about and start by saying, well, we, and then talk about, or well, I, and then talk about what you do. I'm a buyer's agent, I'm a real estate agent, and just talk briefly about what you do. But keep that short because people don't want too much on the solution. So you start with the problem, then you go to the solution, and then off the back of that, you then talk about the outcome. And it could be, for example, help vendors sell faster and for more. It could be something really simple like that. So it's problem, solution, outcome. Um, Now, that'd be the first three steps I'd do, and you can probably get that out if you condense it into no more than 15 to 20 seconds. If the other person's nodding their head and they want a bit more, tell a really brief story. That makes it more memorable. Stats tell, stories sell. A lot of people in real estate focus on the stats, but the story is often what sells it. So problem, solution, outcome, and then maybe a quick story, assuming there's engagement there.
Fantastic. I think that strategy and that framework is gold. And I love that story component because it is that emotional connection because people have such a strong emotional connection to whatever they're selling or buying. It's a big emotional charge that people have
Mm.
either as a vendor or as a buyer. Now you've had some great examples over the years. Is there one or two in particular that stick out of your mind that they came to you with a bunch of problems
Mm.
and going through your process, you achieve some great results for them? Do you have one or two you could like to share?
Yeah, certainly. There's one that comes to mind from late last year. Very successful real estate agent was in a competitive bid against two other agents, and pretty high dollar value property. And so we worked together on this particular agent's pitch and the seven key components that should be in that pitch when he's in the lounge room pitching for the business. So we did that first of all in a verbal structure. Here's what to say in terms of the pitch points. Here are the questions to ask to maximize engagement and to get information out of them as well. So it was the pitch points and the questions and a 7-part story structure. So that was the first part of the engagement. So we had that content and delivered it well in the sit with the respective vendor. And then he found out that there was actually three agents in the mix, and there was an agent that went in the day before the vendor was due to make a decision. and and so he was a bit nervous, right? Because he's thinking,
Yep.
oh, last year, and that's an advantage pitching last. Like that benefit of recency of being the last agent in. There is value there because you can ask about obviously maybe the two prior agents and you can benchmark and differentiate against those two. So he was a bit nervous. And so we managed to find out who the agent was and help him via text messages and emails differentiate his service and his value versus the other agent and managed to win that listing. So that's one example. And that was a frantic
That
24
would have
hours.
been
And
time sensitive too, right?
yeah, and literally looking at the emails that he was wanting to send and the text messages he was wanting to send, and effectively giving not just advice but actually rewriting them for him because time was of the essence.
Mm.
And that differentiation piece is so important. You never want to obviously bash the competition. There's no value in that, but you do need to be really clear about those points of difference. And for him, he had the strongest record in terms of off-market sales in that suburb at that price point. The other guy was a very good presenter, and it would have been easy for him to lose the deal to him. But we just focused on those three things because they are the most relevant pitch points. Type of sale, off-market, price point, suburb, bang, 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 and then go to the longest story of his overarching track record in that suburb, and that was enough to seal the deal. So that was a manic 24 hours. But look, to be frank,
Wow.
James, I love those scenarios. It was a lot of fun.
I just what you said something really hit home is it's not necessarily just the face-to-face pitch like and having those conversations in the lounge room. What you
Mm,
said is around getting the wording right of the text messages and the emails like that.
mm,
It's all part of the pitch. It's
yep.
not just that final component. It's what to say on the telephone when you're organizing a meeting and finding out information. And I think it's really
Mm,
important to have for the audience to have an understanding around that because it's not just that, for example, sales listing presentation, it's what you do
mm,
before, it's what you do after, it's what comms you send. So can you
mm.
elaborate a little bit more around that, around the importance of not just that presentation?
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that because, as I mentioned earlier, it does take up often 7+ contact points for people to buy. So they need to hear the same message, they need to see the same message. And you and I know as consumers that someone could give a great presentation, but then if you go to their website or you get an email with content that is different to that, like there's part of your gut that just goes, this doesn't feel right. And it gives people cause for pause, right? They just sit on the
Yep.
fence and do nothing or say, I'll get back to you. I'm not sure. I need to talk to my husband, wife, whoever. So it's so important to have that consistent comms all throughout and to maintain a consistent character all throughout as well. But specifically, when it comes to real estate agents, one engagement I'm doing at the moment is looking at, for example, right from the very first touch point, like what's on the agent's profile on their website. Number one, what goes out in the pre-appraisal email? What happens in that first meeting? What goes out in the post-appraisal email? Then what goes in the proposal? What are the documents, the collateral that are used in the presentation? How do we talk to that? How do we engage with that and the prospective client? So there's so much stuff that goes into that, and it's all got to line up and sync so it feels right. And I use those
Mm.
words specifically because it's that gut feeling that often drives the decision. When you're selling a high dollar value offering in a competitive market. So yeah, the written stuff is so key. And the last thing I mentioned there, really briefly, James, is I'm always saying to clients, how can you halve the content and double the impact? Because we are making prospects work too hard at the moment.
Yeah, that
Well,
great points, right?
I was going to say, sorry, apparently we have an average attention span these days of 8.25 seconds. Goldfish are at 9, so we're in trouble. So, so it's like cut it down. You can't afford to waste a word. Otherwise, it's just
Wow.
noise. So the question,
8.2 seconds.
are you putting noise into the market or are you putting a message that resonates and is transferable that people can pass on to others as well? So yeah.
So true. So true. So many different layers to that. And I think, as you said, it's not just that presentation. It's everything before, it's everything after, it's the words, it's the collateral. All needs to be aligned to that message, to those values and what the end user needs and wants. Nathan, on the show, we have our 60-second quiz to find out a little bit more about our guests. Are you willing to play?
Let's do it.
Oh, here we go. All right. What's your favorite movie?
I would say both Moneyball and The Big Short.
Love it. What's your favorite food?
If it's a good day, Chobani yogurt. If I'm feeling like I need it just to pig out, it's probably cheesy lasagna.
Ew, yum. What's your favorite holiday destination?
Well, my wife is half Portuguese and from an island called Madeira, which not a lot of Australians know about, but it's a very big holiday destination for Europeans and some North Americans. So I've got to say Madeira.
Beautiful, beautiful. What's your morning routine?
Um, yeah, generally wake up about 4:30, 5 o'clock, get to the gym, get some endorphins going, grab a coffee by about 6:15 and try to do a bit of work before the kids get up and then home and help out with the kids a bit and then kick off the day by sort of quarter to 8 o'clock.
Yeah, nice. What about your evening routine?
Manage the chaos of two daughters, a cat, the dog. No, look, I do my best to try to get off screens by 8:39 to give myself an hour wind down and try to get into bed by 9:30, 10.
Yeah, nice. What do you have a most embarrassing moment?
Oh, I'm sure there's plenty. This is terrible, isn't it? This sounds really bad if I can't come up with one. We bookmark that and I'll come back to it. I'll go
Totally, yeah, that's
fancy now about the most.
totally fine. If you could choose five inspirational people to have dinner with, who would they be? They could be dead or alive.
Um, Muhammad Ali, uh, JFK, Nelson Mandela, um, James Clear, Atomic Habits. Love that book.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, like to have him there. And probably Branson. Yeah, I'd go Branson.
Wow. Great table. Great table. If you were prime minister for the day, what's one thing that you would change?
Well, look, with two young daughters, I would say, and I know they're talking about it anyway, like minimizing use of social media for kids under, I think it's, I should know this, 14 or 16, one of the two, but minimizing use of social media for young kids.
Yeah, fantastic. And best piece of advice.
Best piece of advice. I'd have to go to, it's not advice per se, but it was in his book. I'd have to go back to James Clear. Just that idea of getting 1% better every day, just, the whole habit thing I think is huge because it's everything, right? It's momentum, it's behaviors, it's results, outcomes. So I'd have to go to that. Aim to
Yeah,
get
so
1%
true.
better every day.
That's great. Great piece of advice. What's coming up? What's on the roadmap for the next 12, 24 months for you?
Yeah, certainly. Working with more real estate agents, more buyers agents, doing some speaking gigs, looking ever more closely at the psychological principles that either trigger people to buy or not buy from a behavioral science and neuromarketing point of view. So really implementing even more of that through the whole sales and marketing process. I mean, I mentioned something earlier on our call about, people are 3 times more likely to buy to avoid a problem and gain a benefit. There's a lot of other things we could talk about, but really just accentuating that through the whole process. So you're totally de-risking the chances of people saying no.
Yeah, great. Fantastic. And how can the audience find out more about you, follow your journey, and reach out?
Yeah, thanks, James. Customerreturn.com.au is the website. And once you're on that website, there's a perfect pitch self-evaluation. So it's customerreturn.com.au /perfect pitch self-evaluation. And that's a quick 7 question, takes about 20 seconds, 1 to 3 rating scale on each of those questions, where people can quickly see, how well they're pitching or not. So that's a quick bit of value that people can get off the website.
Fantastic. Guys, go and check it out, customerreturn.com.au. Nathan, honor and a privilege to have you on the show today, mate. Thank you for your time, energy, and expertise. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, James. Thanks so much for having me.